Hello, listeners. It's Mallory Wilsey, Chief Producer of the Enrollify Network, and I want to tell you about another show on our podcast network that I think you'll love. Visionary Voices, the College President's Playbook, is an insightful podcast dedicated to the strategic minds leading today's higher ed institutions. Each episode brings a unique perspective from visionary and tech-forward college presidents, chancellors, and other high-level academic leaders, diving into the complexities and nuances of running a modern educational institution. This show is hosted by Dr. Brian Gross, Vice President for Enrollment Management and Athletics at Hartwick College, and is a valuable resource for current and aspiring leaders in academia, offering a playbook of visionary ideas and practical solutions for the ever-evolving landscape of higher ed. New episodes drop every other Wednesday, and you can subscribe to the show by visiting podcast.enrollify.org or just search Visionary Voices wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome to the Generation AI podcast, where we demystify artificial intelligence in the world of higher education. I am your host, JC Bonilla, joined by the awesome, insightful, and good-looking Ardis Kadiu. How you doing, Ardis?
Oh man, you're killing it. This is the third time that you're doing it, and I think I'm going to hand it off to you now.
It's just because I go off script, man. That's why, right? I cannot read it. I need to just basically add a little bit of flair. Speaking of reading, Ardis, I read in my kids' pre-K, class. They invite parents to read. I was so good that the kindergarten teacher came over and said, "Were you a kindergarten teacher before? Because I've never seen a parent do that." A+. I got an A+ in, reading, it was called Mr. Froggy book. I got an A+, man. So apparently I have a gift for impersonating voices and being off script. So there you go.
I guess that's what we're doing today. We're having a repeat of that wonderful performance. Is that it? Is that the episode?
This is the episode today is me reading AI generated content for children in the voice of Ardis Kadiu. So, sounds good. No, Ardis, today we have a very, very special episode because we want to talk about monetization of AI, specifically this idea of business models. There were two gigantic stories, yin-yang type of thing. One counters the other one attacks the other one. It's fascinating. I'd love for you to give us the walkthrough of these two important stories, because what I'd love to do is talk about business models, so then we can also anchor on your experience of how you're thinking about Element, how you're thinking about monetizing your AI playing Element. So give everybody not only the fundamentals of what is happening with AI pioneers in the realm of monetizing AI, in your story as a pioneer in AI in the higher education space. So today it's all about monetizing and business models of AI. Sounds good?
Sounds great. Yes, I love talking about myself.
Well, before we get there, you have to tell people what happened with Google and OpenAI, that literally the same story, but from different polarities. What happened at Google and what happened at OpenAI?
Yeah, so OpenAI, for those of you who are using ChatGPT, which was one of the most popular chatbots out there, you needed an account in order to use ChatGPT. As of last week, OpenAI made ChatGPT accessible without an account. So essentially, it's a public website that anybody can go into and get access to it. Obviously, they're not having it available with their latest models or with their most powerful GPT-4 model. However, still, it's available to the public without an account. So anyone, any age can technically use it right now.
And why would they do that?
I mean, we can get into the motivations for that.
Just give us a preview. What in 10 seconds, why would someone basically remove the barriers of entry and also, as you said, make the model less sophisticated for accessibility and more eyeballs, if you will? What's the gain?
Yeah, the gain is always more users, and OpenAI is
market share.
Market share, exactly. So they're moving into a place where they want to compete with the big giant Google out there, and they want to get a lot more eyeballs. We've talked about this in this podcast quite a bit before, where we've started to think about the generative search experience that Google had introduced, and we're going to jump into that. And that's the second big story here. But from the OpenAI perspective, we're now seeing a lot of behavior changes in consumers and how they're searching for content and how they're discovering content. And one of the biggest drivers for that is the use of chatbots and the use of these large chatbots that like ChatGPT, where users are actually going in to search for longer queries and longer content in the form of asking questions rather than just searching for keywords. So this behavior change is completely driven by how good this content and these responses are from conversational interfaces like with ChatGPT. And we're seeing that change happening. So OpenAI is trying to compete in that space. We don't know exactly what a lot of the motivators are for that, if they're going to open up a search engine or if they're going to introduce something very similar to Perplexity. For those of you who don't know, Perplexity is an amazing kind of discovery experience that you go in and it pulls information from the web and it kind of synthesizes it for you in a generative experience where it's a combination of Google and ChatGPT. So that's kind of where the facts stop.
So it's a play of three important things on AI models, and we're going to come and expand that in just a little bit. But this idea that traditional service, it's free. Google search, we all can search in Google because it's free, knowing that the monetization there, it's on the amount of users and the ad exposure that we get. So that when we search, right, how much we click through and what advertisers and people actually would pay for our searches. But then the other components is that there's a subscription part that comes in and where AI-powered content has a premium and then you can charge it. What is happening in these two stories is that Google starts and is known for its freeware approach, if you will, and is adding the subscription model to add a premium to their new AI content, right? It's basically where they're going. Whereas OpenAI starts for free, but really their paid model is where you start seeing all that. And they've been known for the subscription model, and now going into the traditional services remain kind of free. Very interesting and incredible strategic rolls out. I think the direction that is happening here is that we start seeing how it's not a one-size-fits-all, and how the deployment of AI models required a really, really good, review of fundamentals, knowing the playbook, but also remembering that many of these pioneers are writing a new chapter into business models because these technologies are pushing us in that direction. So, Ardis, as I lay out this idea of current business models and how they think about strategy, could you just kind of give me the lay of the land? There's three things that happens in business models. And for everybody, think about macro ideas that when you think about business models, you need to understand the customer needs, the value that you bring, and then the pricing that it has. So as a technologist, what are the three things that comes to mind, or how did you go about thinking of the business model of Element, right? So let's start thinking about AI comes to Element. How you start thinking about that? How does the business model of Element in AI commingle in your head, knowing that you need to understand the consumer needs, the value creation that you capture, and specifically, how are you going to price that? How do you start thinking about that? Before we go into the specific things that I know we're going to be talking about today, like Discovery X and whatnot. But how do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I've been very lucky that I've kind of worked in the vertical in higher education for a while, and I've been able to connect, the need there very closely to what I saw was a problem. So traditionally, you don't see that quite a bit, right? You don't see that a lot. However, I was really lucky to have been in that environment and to kind of work on that problem and kind of work on it. So from a business model perspective, you really have to understand that customer need first, right? So you have to have deep understanding of the target customer, specific problem that you're trying to address. Then you have to think about kind of capturing the value or the creation, capturing that value. So how do you articulate, what you're delivering, kind of the right combination of pricing, packaging, and capturing the value that's crucial to your customer. And then the last one is more of thinking about a little bit more on this strategic pricing. It's how does that reflect the strategic value of that solution? So balancing really cost and then the differentiators that you're delivering with it. With Element, one of the things that we understood really closely was we needed to approach it around the student experience. So that was our differentiator, or
That's the value creation, right? You're in the how you start mapping the consumer needs, that it's more of a student life cycle, right? The journey of the student does not end on the deposit. If you will, it starts there and it's circular. So I think that's, as I hear you talk, that was very interesting how you started talking about student engagement, and it's basically stretching into what we would call admissions or student life and all academics and all those type of things. Ardis, on the pricing, when we start thinking about the macro forces that shape business models, whether it's AI, technology, or pretty much anything that has a technology or a membership, there's three schools of thoughts. The first one is subscription pricing, right? So you pay to have access to it. But there's also a view that you pay as much as you use. It's more of a consumption pricing, and cloud-based services have dominated that. But then with AI, something really interesting has happened, that is embedded pricing. In a way, you compete or you differentiate with it. So in a way, you're not pricing more. It's not subscription. It's not based on consumption. It's in a way, this is how you compete. I think you're more on the third one, right? With as it relates to Element, you're not doing subscriptions. You're not doing consumption per se. Embedded pricing, is that right?
Yeah, right now we're not charging for a lot of our AI capabilities. So essentially, we're kind of embedding it into the offering that we're delivering. But to your point, if you're looking at it from the high level, somebody has to pay for it. So,
hey, schools, if you're listening to this, you're paying for it. He's just not telling you.
That's right. Somebody has to pay for it. I mean, with OpenAI, they certainly have a lot of money. So like the compute that it requires to run ChatGPT and even have it open is incredible. They're burning millions and millions, if not billions of dollars annually or even monthly in order to run those services. However, they're actually getting something out of it. In a lot of cases, if you don't have a paid version, they're getting your data because they want to train on your conversations and some of those conversations. With Google, they're giving it to you for free, but they're getting paid by advertisers. They're getting paid on ads. So the business model is have a large audience and pay for it, for the usage by ads, or have a subscription model and have everybody pay for that subscription. Or if you want to capture market share really quickly, have it available for a very low cost and have it open so you can gain market share, and then you put some kind of subscription monetization on top of it. So for us at Element, we actually took the really hard part. We're selling B2B, we're selling to businesses and schools. And when we think about monetization, we have to show the value, we have to show the ROI. It's actually very difficult to go into a school and say, hey, don't worry about how much you're spending on this because somebody else is going to pay for it. So as the end user, we have to show the end user the value so they actually pay for it up front. So it's a little bit harder on the B2B side, but we're talking a lot of consumer sides. And that's really the crux of what we're talking about today is really, the end consumer. Like we as end users are using Google. We as end users are using OpenAI or ChatGPT. And they are figuring it out, like what are these new business models and how AI is getting embedded in their products. And they're trying to figure out how that's going to manifest itself at the end of the day. And the consumer, which is us, we're kind of get caught in the middle of it. Sometimes we get a lot of value for free, but we have to give up our data. And sometimes we have to pay, something out of it in order to not give our data away, right? So to advertisers.
Interesting. So before we go into all these generative AI models and how we start thinking of generative AI business models and how we start thinking about them, can you generalize what you just said about, Element in B2B business, the CRM sector? So Element, HubSpot, Salesforce. Did you see an increase in SaaS pricing after generative AI became a thing? Did Element change its price? Did you see Salesforce and the Einstein stuff that they were doing? And, I didn't. And it feels like every B2B is doing this embedded pricing. Someone else is paying for it. I don't know who, but someone else is. But yet you're deploying the tech.
So we're actually seeing the increase in pricing. So for example, if you want to buy Copilot for, your institution or for your company, Microsoft Copilot, you're paying $20, $30 a month per user additionally. If you want to buy Google Gemini, which is their enterprise version, you're paying $20, $30 a month for that. If you're buying Salesforce Einstein Copilot, you're paying for that. So if you're deploying this at the enterprise level, you're paying per user. So it's like $20 to $30 a month per user for the generative AI components, but not the consumer side, right? So the low capability models like GPT-3 from ChatGPT, like those aren't necessarily, you're not paying for those. But once you start putting it into for work and enterprises or companies, then you're certainly paying for it for sure.
Interesting. So, Ardis, we took a deep dive into different business models, trying to understand what the players are, and we just did a little bit on the CRM B2B space. But whether you're in the B2B space, B2C space, whether you're CRM, whether you are in Uber, there's about 8 models that I can detect that pioneers, the folks that are writing the chapter on how to monetize generative AI or any version of AI, are subscribing to, experimenting, and they may be that all these collapse into 2, 3, or expand. The first one is what I call the rise of the AI as first paradigm. What does that mean? You just have to do it, and you don't know who's going to pay for it, right? So this idea is that, let's think about Vayner right now, our agency. Top of mind, we know that we need to change it. We're just basically starting to add these capabilities, and we don't know how we're going to pay for it, but we must have it. And this is where we've been talking about it, that there's kind of normal trajectories that if you're a Google shop, you may consider Google Gemini. If you are an AWS intensive shop, you may be considering their footprints for generative AI and so on and so forth. So the idea is you embrace AI, not as an add-on, but a core venture. And you basically start looking at your tech stack and building organically as opposed to making a big investment. Reactions to this one?
I mean, I agree with that. So, there's 2 things, right? So when in this podcast, and especially in this episode, we're kind of putting 2 different hats on. We're putting the consumer hat on, and we're putting the builder hat on. So the consumer hat is like, okay, how am I paying for this? Or like, what's my role in this? And that's the consumer. We're using ChatGPT, Gemini.
How much is this going to cost me? 100%, right?
Right, exactly. But then we're putting the builder hat on, which is like leaders as we're building on top of AI. We're building products that we're going to sell to other end users, either companies or consumers. But AI is actually a core part. So we're building on top of AI. So what you're saying right now is that as builders, we're embedding AI into our products and our service offerings because we know we have to have it there, right? It's going to provide us more productivity, more flexibility. It's going to make our products better. And, of course, the end user consumer is demanding that. They're demanding faster, better, more productive products. We're doing the same thing at Element, right? We did the same thing. So in the beginning, we said, shit, we don't care how much this costs. We're going to use the best models. We don't have a business model yet. We're going to eat up the cost. We just want to put everything in there to see how the market is going to react. And that was the first one that you're talking about, the rise of like the first paradigm. So we didn't have a business model. Like we weren't charging for it. We did not know how much to charge for it because we didn't know how much it was going to cost us.
So the way to summarize this first business model, everybody, is from it's expected to have AI. The consumer doesn't feel it. And the developer or the person behind the business is basically trying to figure out on as they go modality. The next natural evolution, which is basically what Ardis just explained, the $30 on Copilot here and there, right, is the subscription model. That there is an AI as a service, as an add-on, and it has an scalability. So the more I add to that, the more I pay. It's like going to the restaurant. If you order the entry, the appetizer, the dessert, and the drinks, the bill keeps on going up. The idea here is there's a footprint in the tech stack, and the AI layer comes in. A classical example, what we've seen here, is Amazon Watson and how they've done their compute and basically the ads on. So the more you use, the more you pay. There are flat fees. You can use the OpenAI Pros and the paid versions for I think it's $40. I forget what it is, right? And whether you use 1 prompt a day or 1,000 a day, you pay the same. Whether you use a custom GPT or none, it's basically you always pay the same. I like what you were saying from the user level. Basically, what I'm expecting is that this is bulletproof and I can just basically add it on demand and also drop it as needed, right? And there may be some penalties, but that's kind of how it works.
Yeah, we saw a lot of apps basically come in. For example, like I said, Copilot or Notion AI introduced. If you use Notion, that's in the subscription. If you're using Perplexity, the paid version, that's a subscription model. So essentially, everybody said, hey, OpenAI set the price at about $20 for the ChatGPT Pro version. And then everybody else followed. It's like, why $20? Well, nobody really knows. I guess they figured out that was a small enough number that somebody would pay for that monthly, but it was a big enough number that we could cover certain compute. So all of these tools have kind of all standardized around that $20, $25, $30 a month subscription fee. So nobody really knows how much it's actually costing them per customer or if that's sustainable, so to speak, right?
100%. The next four are kind of variations of the idea that is presented to us, the consumer, and then I'm just expecting it, or it's presented to me, the consumer, in a way that I can add it and pay premium. But this idea that it could be a feedback loop. Today, Spotify, for instance, will come and allow you to have this AI DJ, right, and give you recommendations that are as good as the usage that you have had in the past. Your ability to come and play 1,000 times Cocomelon songs, because that's what my kids listen in my profile. So all of a sudden I get these weird mixes of children's music and the jazz that I like, right? Literally. So what you start seeing is that the user interaction, the data feeds into the AI model, and us, the consumer, start kind of getting that benefit, and that feedback loop is where the monetization would come in. Again, really interesting adaptations of is it free and then the premium aspect, but it's a really clear business model that would allow me to say, that's why I stay in Spotify versus Apple Music, because it just gets me better. Thoughts on that?
I'm not 100% sure. So from a consumer perspective, that makes a lot of sense to me, but I don't know from a business perspective how that works. I'm guessing by using a lot of your data, they're able to make their service a lot better, or keeping you in the service a lot longer by personalizing and by providing more AI, they can personalize your experience. But I'm not sure around the business model aspect of that.
I was talking, one of our accounts is Duolingo, and I was talking to some people today on Duolingo. Do you know that Duolingo is one of the, I wish I could say this in absolute terms, but it's one of the most used apps or installs in the world, right?
I believe that.
And they just venture into mathematics and arts teaching. Did you know it's free? That I didn't know. So the way it works is that they get you into a feedback loop. What does that mean? That you get this thing for free and you get a minimum number of errors, penalties that you can have, because when you don't get the exercise, there's a penalty, and the number of attempts you can do on a daily basis. So this idea that they start perfecting what they deploy to you based on your learning pedagogy, the amount of time that you spend, to the point that all of a sudden, I guess they create these lookalikes, and they see, like, you see Ardis in your community, he's now doing 15 attempts, but my freemium only allows 10 attempts to get and compete with you. I need 5 more. And this is where it kind of starts becoming smart. That how does it recommend the next level? And it's all about the usage that I've given it in the past.
They're basically using your data.
It's a variation of personalization, 100%. It's a variation of personalization, but the idea is that it's a feedback loop. It only comes and becomes better with usage, right? The next model is what is called the ecosystem model, right? It's created to interconnect, this idea of solutions, broader usage, diversification of revenue. So this is where I find it really interesting. So as big Amazon users, AWS, and we're not using services that Amazon provides that have AI, right? And about 3 weeks ago, you told me about, JC, you need to get your team to start vectorizing databases. And that's the first thing I asked them is, how do we vectorize in Amazon? Is there an ecosystem? And it's this idea that would build out of the subscription models, but it's all part of the ecosystem, right? Knowing the use cases and how you're going to come and expand off of that.
Hey, it's Mallory. Exciting news. I'm hosting the Engage Summit in Raleigh on June 25th and 26th, and I'd love to meet you there. Together, we'll dive into the mind of the modern student, what fires them up, how they interact, and what they expect in today's digital age, and how tools like AI help put them in the driver's seat of their education. We have some terrific speakers, including our closing keynote, New York Times best-selling author Jeff Selingo. Sessions will dig into practical ideas and innovative strategies to get your team more student-centered and ready to adopt AI. And many of your favorite Enrollify hosts are presenting too, like Jamie Hunt, Jenny Lee Fowler, and Brian Gross. Use the discount code Enrollify50 for an extra $50 off your registration. Learn more and register at engage.element451.com. We can't wait to see you there.
Anything to add there, my friend?
I mean, the ecosystem model is a very interesting one because it's one of those things where if you're not a leader, then the ecosystem model makes a lot of sense. So traditionally, you're going to stay in the Apple ecosystem, or you're going to stay in the AWS ecosystem or the Azure, because you don't want to go use something else, right? So if you have something that's just good enough and you're not the leader, then that's a really good model to go after. So in the case of Amazon, they were slow and they were behind in adopting AI. However, they said, hey, come bring your other less known models here and we're going to deploy them for you because they're in our ecosystem. You're going to get some benefit out of them. And by the way, it's going to take us a little bit of time to catch up. So in the meantime, we're going to use our kind of unified services that we have. So we make it really, really easy for you to actually use this stuff, rather than we don't offer you the best, but it's good enough, right? That you can get some value out of it.
I think it's, for example, let's stay in the Amazon ecosystem, Alexa with voice detection and becoming just much better in supporting you. So where is the business model there? On Whole Foods, shopping lists. You know how much of my shopping right now is done automatically because, hey, I need milk. And it's basically the whole reef of milk comes with butter and eggs, and all those on the shopping cart went from $3 to $30. And it's all the buildup of a better experience on voice, right? Using Alexa and all those type of underlying technologies. But the monetization, it's on the ecosystem, which is basically the purchase of eggs, milk, bread, and butter. That's ecosystem at its best. Do you want to tell people, do you think your play on packs in that evolution that you saw in Element in higher education space, is that ecosystem for your point of view, in your point of view?
Our platform is pretty inclusive, and it's, Element it has a lot of capabilities, and it's kind of an all-in-one platform. So it's very inclusive, and our approach has been since the beginning is it's much better to have that component or that service as part of the platform than using something else. Take like one of the latest things that we added in there was appointments, right? So we needed to be able to schedule appointments. A lot of folks in a lot of schools were going out and using Calendly, for example, to do appointments. Is our appointments module going to be as good as Calendly or better? Probably not, but it's 95% there. And because it's integrated with everything else, now we can get the benefit of saying, okay, you can now use AI to schedule an appointment, which is much, much more valuable than having some obscure feature on round robin or some crazy thing that Calendly might have added in there over the past year or so. So that's kind of how we think about it when we benefit. So we have added a lot of capabilities in the platform because we know that the benefit of being part of the platform and integrated is much, much more valuable than having a single point solution that's going to be really good. Like it needs to be 10 times better in order for somebody to say, no, I'm just going to use this point solution.
Yeah. Ardis, the next one, it's a different twist on personalization. And you spoke about this use case when I asked you a question on how does Apple thinks about privacy and how they use their data, which is actually a breach of privacy, right? It's actually the feed of a good LLM or generative AI model. So these global solutions with kind of local partners stem from the idea that there is a global model or regional model, and it gets deployed across other regions or it gets localized as needed. So one of the examples that we saw, right, is that Facebook AI-driven blood donation features these targets that need a specific deployments of, the type of people, the communities. It's all about capturing, but it's the India model gets moved into Brazil, right? So I can come and raise my hand and say, you know what? Whatever happened in that community, in that region, in that geolocation, I want. I have experience doing this when we did market modeling, a very machine learning approach, but let's say the Houston model that we had trained and deployed, is transferred to Seattle. And then what happens is that community in Seattle doesn't have to pay for the training, the amount of R&D needed. So there's an aspect of you don't start from scratch. And with the RAG things that you mentioned, with kind of how AI works, I think it's really interesting that you can have these transfer learning techniques back to machine learning, and they just are so consumable and so practical. And I think that's a really interesting local model. I haven't seen it a lot, but definitely there's a potential. What are your takes in this idea of global solutions for local problems from region to region, a play of transfer learning on OpenAI? I'm sorry, on generative AI, not OpenAI, and generative AI.
Generative AI. Yeah, I think you can look at this in two different ways. You can say, okay, this foundational technology or these foundational models, they have consumed and they are really, really good at the world knowledge. So they can be multi-region. But the reality is that different regions and different parts of the world are generating less data, and a lot of that data might be better accessible for training than others. So we are kind of left with a Western kind of point of view in a lot of these models. That's why we see a lot of the biases coming in. And so we try to fix that afterwards. So as we consume more and more of this data, the foundational models are going to get more multi-region. We're seeing it with language, for example. In the beginning, we only had a couple of languages that these models, mostly English, were able to do. But now we have capabilities on hundreds of different languages, and they're really, really good in those different languages. So the bigger they get, the better they get. And to your point about building products that are region specific, I don't know if I have an opinion on that one specifically, but you can look at it as a general problem. And that's the way I see it, is that you can look at it at a personalization level for these solutions, not just for a region, but you can look at it for industries. You can look at it within industries. You can look at it different sectors of that industry. In higher education, for example, we look at it like, okay, we need to build products that are very specific for community college or the need of how community college operates versus a larger research institution. They work a little bit differently. They're focused on different things. But even within that, you have non-traditional education. So that's very different from a traditional education where it takes, like a year to recruit that student, non-traditional online. Graduate degrees are a little bit faster. So even within that, there's the specific use cases. So as we build products, we're going to see a lot of these very differentiated, personalized approaches to the use case. But I would say the foundational models are going to be pretty homogenized because they just so hungry for data that we're not going to see regional data. I mean, you're really a big fan of what China and India are doing, and you're rooting for localized AI companies in there, and we're certainly seeing some of those. But at the end of the day, I don't know if those specialized models are going to be any better than, say, a GPT-5 trained on Chinese, data.
Yeah, you may be right. But one of the things I kind of like is that when you start thinking about these business models, right, it's not only the technology, it's, as you have mentioned in prior episodes, the technology allows you to basically think about the use cases and the conversational UX layers and all those type of things. So what if the end-to-end solution right now has been deployed on a sector? So let's use your example. We just have a fantastic model that allows us to recruit athletes. And we've perfected it, right? And it does all the use cases, and it has a co-pilot, and it has an assistant, and it literally does the athletic play. So can we use that for PhD students and all these schools that are trying to get the best talent to do a PhD? I would argue yes. And this idea is that it has been perfected on a domain. It's regional, or in this case, it's categorical or sector based. It kind of jumps out of it. So I guess that's where it's at, that I would suspect your element, and you come and you tell us, school, we have an end-to-end deployment on student engagement, and this module is fantastic for art students. We can deploy it for engineering students right now, and it should be something that it's easier for you to build as opposed to doing from scratch. I don't know.
Well, guess what? I mean, we just released specifically Bolt AI assistants, and rather than building a specific catch-all, assistant or AI agent, we built many of them because they have personalities and they have different skill sets. I mean, we talked about AI assistants 2 episodes ago, but that's what we built in Element exactly for this use case, because we need to treat certain interactions differently. And the way that we wrap up and with the way we deploy that is through an AI assistant, right? So you have AI assistant for whatever use cases or whatever personas that you think about, engineering students. I mean, we can get down very, very granular, but we built a platform that we're deploying all this AI assistants on that are very specific manifestations of helping schools and helping staff to be more productive and to support them better.
What is this called again for Element?
We actually just put out a press release today announcing it. So it's called Bolt AI Assistants.
Bolt AI Assistants. And what is the business model there? So you need to have Element and then you add it? Is that how it works?
That's right. Yeah, you need to have Element. Well, actually, we haven't figured out the business model for it yet. So right now, we're just embedding it as part of our platform. I mean, you're absolutely right. This hits home right now because we've looked at different business models and we said, okay, do we just charge our customers based on the usage of this feature? And we know exactly how much they're using because we're calling all these different APIs behind the scenes, and we can rack up whatever the usage is. Or do we go in and just add another cost on per user? Or do we say, you know what, we're going to increase by 10% of your annual cost because we're adding this capability in there? Or also you can say, you know what, for every assistant that you add to your platform or to your subscription, we're going to charge you an X amount, because think about it as adding headcount to your environment. So now an assistant equals a headcount. So I don't know. I mean, that's a really interesting question.
You just walk us through, I think, 3 of the models that we discussed. This idea of first, you have to have it, right? Then you're contemplating maybe a subscription model. I would call that feedback loop as well, which is the term that we discussed, because in a way it creates stickiness and retention. So maybe that's where it's at. And obviously, it's part of the ecosystem model. That'll be the 4th one that maybe you're playing out. Ardis, pivot on, there's actually 2 more, but this is the last one that is structure, and then the last one is totally on the structure. But open source models, they collaborate. And as the play on how do you monetize a llama, what is Elon Musk's, is it Grok? Grok, right? And any other open source deployment of generative AI is that it's building on 2 things. It getting better, which has a community component, so getting the community to make it better, but at the same time, the customization, the training, and all the different important things that come from it. Example is TensorFlow. TensorFlow, I remember seeing it the first time when we tried into computer vision, and it was so exciting, but it sucked. It was the worst at literally detecting whether, is there a smile, a baby, or in today, the whole thing is getting so much better, and it's getting cheaper, but it's also open source, and it's being improved by the community, and it's really making a crack. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I'm gonna disagree with the open source approach here. So
go for it.
Like, you think open source, but it's not really open source. Like, when you get a model, all you get is a CSV file. Think about it as a huge CSV file with a whole bunch of numbers in it. You have no idea what to do. Like, you can't just change one thing and say, oh, you know what? Now I'm modifying it for myself. Like, sure, you can do some fine tuning, but training and coming up with those weights for that model, it takes hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions and hundreds of millions sometimes with Llama and all of this. So you need to have huge, large infrastructures in order to train these models. And then you put the weights as open weight models out there. So then what happens is that folks can take that and then they can run it on their own machines, right? So that's all they're doing. And maybe they can fine tune it for certain things, right? So they can fine tune it, but they can't change the underlying training and what data was trained on, all the underlying weights, maybe a little bit on the fine tuning side. So when you think about open source models, like only the biggest companies and some of the big companies, they're the ones who are releasing these very powerful models. So the business model there is not necessarily that you're going to benefit from the community giving back to you, but I don't know how, like what the business model might be that people are building on this and they might be contributing back, I don't know, data, or they might be building on the ecosystem. So then maybe you can put that on your, I don't know, your cloud, and then you can say, okay, this model is now available in our cloud. I have no idea, what the business model is there for kind of releasing these open source ones.
No, I don't think you're wrong, right? Just because it's open source and free or cheap to get at the outset, that doesn't mean that it's meaningful. The actionability and the applicability in making it mine, it has dollars and cents. And there are business models on the customization, the training, and all those type of things. And they could be very profitable. I can talk to you about Cloudera. I can talk to you about multiple models that do very well just by customizing those things. There's also a totally hippie approach. I haven't seen it, I think. Maybe Llama is trying to get there, but this idea that it's all free and, is of the community, like the R project, the programming statistical tool, it's all free, right? So we'll see where this gets us, but there's definitely a subset of LLM and generative AI players that are operating in the open source, and they will have to make a decision of how hippie they go for the community, or knowing that dollars and cents could be added, to your point, because a plain CSV file is no bueno. So there's dollars and cents in adding meaning and customizing that. Ardis, the last one is very unstructured. Uncharted territories. You have Slack, right? And this is not a plain AI thing, but it's the idea that there's these companies trying to deploy a business model, very startup life, and then you're pivoting, you're finding kind of where you fit in. If you remember how Slack started, right? Slack was not designed to be this communications tool that it is today, right? And it's so basically codified in how teams communicate. And through the lens of COVID, when we were remote, it saved dozens or thousands of companies and teams from falling by collaboration. But it did not start like that. It was pivot after pivot after pivot, being flexible, remaining kind of flexible with the business model and adapting. And the AI landscape is going to have that. So venturing into uncharted territories and adapting and knowing that your business model doesn't emerge, it's a true business model. And I would say half of the startups don't have that defined, how they monetize. They have an idea and they go until they find their market fit, and then the business model kind of follows, right? So it's perfectly fine if it's not there and it's evolving, the technology and the business model.
Yep. I think you can take an example from the latest pivot of Inflection AI. They started to build Pi as the AI chatbot, and they saw that they couldn't make it. They were 4th, 5th, 6th in that list. So now they pivoted and said, you know what? We can't win this race. It's going to require so much money. So we're just going to sell our, well, I won't say our soul, but we're going to sell ourselves to Microsoft.
It's just going to be a hard pivot.
A hard pivot. That's right. And now those models are available in Azure, but essentially they got acquired for the talent that they had in the team. And that was the pivot there.
Awesome. So Ardis, to recap, we spoke about business models that are undefined and to be determined. This idea of business models that function out of an open source, inabilities to be very, very customized. So there's an opportunity there. We spoke about the model transfer, something that gets trained regional or in a category gets moved. We spoke about personalization and variations of it, and it could be a subscription model. And we also spoke about this idea of a version of personalization in subscription, which is kind of the feedback loop. But what I would say is that everyone in the AI space today is in the rise of the AI first paradigm, which is the idea of just getting there and figuring it out as it goes, right? Ardis, to bring it home, you already spoke about your Vault application Element. Is there anything else that you can contextualize these business models as it relates to Element? Anything you want to plug in or tell everybody, yeah, and this is how I'm thinking about it in Element?
Yeah, so we're building a lot of AI right now, and we're trying to figure it out. Like I said, I think we're figuring it out in the sense that we don't know how the market is going to perceive the value of the things that we're putting out there. And it's going to be very difficult for us to say, you know what, we're going to charge you X amount for this specific feature because we know exactly the value that we're driving in there. So we're going to figure it out a little bit as well. But this idea of somebody has to pay for it, that's going to be true. And right now, a lot of businesses are benefiting from getting amazing technology for very low cost to try things out. And not that technology's cost is not going to go down. Of course, it will go down. But we're going to be much more knowledgeable about the value that we're delivering, and the cost of that technology is going to be more aligned with the value going forward. So really excited to see what we have coming up. I feel like we need to do a lot more episodes around this for sure.
100%. Everybody, the deployment of technology, it's exciting, right? And AI, generative AI, it's basically compressing the deployment of technology in ways that we have not thought about it. But today's episode was to give you a preview of how someone's got to pay for it, using Ardis' voice, and how there's probably 8 variations in which this can be done. If you're thinking about, from the consumer side, how should I pay for this? There's about 8 options, and it could cost you 0, or it could cost you an arm and a leg. But you're also thinking about, how do I pass this bill to my users? I hope this episode helped you as an inspiration on how you start thinking about that. Ardis, you want to send us off?
Well, this was great, JC. Thanks for kicking it off the episode again. And till next time, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Generation AI is part of the Enrollify podcast network. If you like this podcast, chances are you're going to like other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing weekly, and we've got a wide range of marketing, enrollment, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks, all designed to empower you to be a better higher ed professional. Our shows help higher ed leaders and professionals like you find their next big idea. They feature a selection of the industry's best as your hosts, like Jamie Hunt, Seth Odell, Jenny Lee Fowler, Brian Gross, and many of your favorite leaders in higher ed. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the next generation AI student engagement platform that's helping institutions all over the country create meaningful, personalized, and engaging connections with their prospects and students. Learn more at element451.com.